So in January of 2019, I went down to Phoenix and I ran the 24-hour across the years running race.
You gotta go ring that bell.
100 miles.
Woo! Woo!
100-mile Woo! You know, in that final mile loop, I had a lot of opportunity to reflect. I reflected on how far I've come as a runner, but maybe more importantly, how far I've come as a human being. If you know me, you know that it's never about the run. For me, it's about the people. It's about the lessons. It's about the discipline to train and the grit to push through what you used to think was impossible. It's about relationships. It's about strengthening existing ones and creating new ones. I run for me and for no one else. So whether you are just running a 24-hour race, or just running a 5K, or just walking a block, do it for you and for no one else. I think you'll be amazed at what can happen when you just show up.
All right, and there we are. Today we're talking to Mike Cameron. He's a Canadian writer, speaker, philanthropist, ultra-marathoner, we'll get into that, an advocate against gender-based violence. Mike went from literally bagging shit, this is from your website, Mike, to founding, building, and running an award-winning multi-million-dollar business. He's worked on a variety of nonprofits and charities to pave the way for violence-free future. Today, he designs programs to assist men and tap into their emotions in a real and authentic way using his emotional reconnection practice. His book, Becoming a Better Man, is available on Amazon, and we'll put the links up here so everybody can get it. If you're on YouTube, you got to check out his TEDx talk, The Way Men Think of Strong is Wrong. I definitely urge everybody to take a look at that. I watched that. It's pretty emotional, I think, and I got a lot out of it. So welcome, Mike.
Thanks, Ryan. I'm thrilled to be here, man.
I appreciate it. You just came back from a trip. Could you tell everybody what that was about?
Yeah, you know what? I was down in New Zealand visiting some friends, and I like to make these destination trips around something. So this one was my friend moved down there, and he's one of my run buddies. So he had messaged me a few months back and said he was going to do this Tarawera ultra marathon down there. It's a 100-miler, and invited me to come down and do that. So that was, my birthday is February 10th. I turned 50 in 2019, and we did a destination race for my 50th. Down in Costa Rica. So I thought, yeah, this year let's do New Zealand. So I think this may become a tradition. We'll do these destination races.
So how did you? To me, that sounds like, driving 100 miles is pretty good. How did you get involved in an ultra marathon like that?
Yeah, it's kind of like most things in my life. It's this progression of how do I chase the next big thing? How do I stepping stones, right? The first thing I sort of started with in my fitness journey was that marathon, obviously was the big goal. And, I started with a 5K, got to a 10K, half marathon, eventually got to a marathon. And in 2012, I split with my wife and sort of threw myself back into fitness at that time, just as a bit of a, I don't know, maybe coping mechanism at that point, and ended up doing Ironman triathlon in 2013, and ultimately just sort of progressed from there. And running was just an easier outlet because, you lace up your shoes, you head out the door and you run. Whereas triathlon was a lot more involved from a training perspective. So I shifted my endurance focus from triathlon to ultra marathons in about 2016, and then started with a 30-miler, then a 50-miler, and then ultimately I've now competed in 400-milers.
Wow, is the toughest thing the physical part, or is it the emotional part?
I think you obviously have to be prepared physically, but definitely the emotional and mental piece of the puzzle is the big one. It's that mindset of relentless forward progress. Just keep moving. You're going to hit low points at some point in the race. I mean, there's just no question about it. For me, we're talking about, depending on the course, anywhere from 24 to 32 hours of running. So yeah, at some point it's going to freaking suck. There's no getting around that. There's no amount of training that is going to get you to a point where it doesn't suck at some point in the race. So it's really more about tapping into that mindset and just continuing to move forward, even when it sucks, and know that, that'll shift. My mantra becomes, when you hit that low point, it's, keep moving, wait an hour and see how you feel.
Mm.
And, usually there's a bit of a turnaround. I mean, it doesn't always have a turnaround. This last one was not a positive outcome. I ended up picking up a bit of a stomach bug the day before the race, and I made it just shy of 50 miles, but ultimately I couldn't keep any food in. It was going out both ends as soon as I could put it in, and it was just, I ended up having to pull the plug.
When you were growing up, were you always athletic? Were you into running, or were you into
No.
others? No.
No, it's funny. I talk about it all the time. Like, I'm not an athlete. People laugh because, well, of course you're an athlete. You do all these athletic things. But yeah, the reality is, I've always been more sort of geek than jock, more nerd than cool kid. And, athletics has never been something that's big in my radar. And one of the things I pride myself on is my work ethic. And it's one of the reasons I love the long distance stuff. I will never be a podium finisher. But I've got that work ethic, and for me, that's what it takes to get through these longer distances. Is you've just got to grind it out.
Do you find that kind of equates into life as well? I mean, you have tough situations, and I know I do, in business or life, and you can look back to these really tough races that you've been in, and I mean, you wanted to quit.
Yeah, it's all practice, right? I talk about it a lot. It's, I attempt to take the word try out of my vocabulary and replace it with practice. So anytime my talks, I talk about this all the time. I don't want you to try anything that I talk about. I want you to practice everything, because when we shift from try to practice, try has this sort of pass fail mentality. When we can move to practice, we know that practice just makes us better. We get a little bit better each time we practice. So for me, these ultra marathons are just an opportunity to practice embracing the suck. When I got into triathlons, one of the guys I followed was an older racer. I think he was probably 40 at the time. And Chris McCormick, he's won multiple Ironmans. And he wrote a piece called Embrace the Suck. And he talked about how, for him, moving from short course triathlon, so like the Olympic distance triathlon, to Ironman, he said there was just no amount of training that was going to get him to a point where at some point in the race, it didn't suck. There's just no amount of training that you can do that's going to avoid that suck. So he had to shift his mindset from avoiding to embracing. And, I took that article, I actually rewrote it, I don't know, probably 5-6 years ago, in the context of business. And it's the same thing. You can have all the knowledge in the world, you can be best prepared, you can have the best product, but at some point, business is going to suck. Something's going to come along, a competitor is going to come up with something faster, newer, better. Your key staff is going to quit. Something's going to happen. So there's no amount of preparation that is going to allow you to completely avoid that suck. So then it becomes about practicing embracing that suck. And for me, the ultra marathons are a controlled environment where I can do that, right? I know, I mean, we've got aid stations every, I don't know, 10 miles maybe. So I know worst case scenario, if I got to bail, I got a point where I can bail. So it's kind of that controlled environment where you put yourself into a position where it's going to be hard. It's going to suck. And it allows you to practice that in a somewhat controlled environment. Because as you say, we know that life is going to throw something at us at some point that's going to fucking suck, whether we like it or not.
Yep, exactly. Well, that's a great way to look at it, honestly. Um, what did you want to do when you were growing up? How did you get involved in business that you are right now?
You know, it's growing up, I wanted to be a millionaire. Like I that was really the extent of it. I I kind of always felt, you know, I think like many of us, that I was special and I was destined for greatness and I was going to do big things. Um, I don't know that I had anything in particular that I wanted to do. You know, I talk about literally bagging shit. When I was 18 years old, you know, I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do. When I was 16, I was getting in all kinds of trouble at home. Mom and dad ended up shipping me off to Australia to live with my uncle to sort of, you know, quote unquote, turn my life around. And when I came home, still no purpose. Ended up getting a job at a garden supply wholesale company, literally bagging steer manure. And that was, you know, in hindsight for me, that was kind of the beginning of my exploration into the impact that emotion has on human behavior. So I worked in the soil plant, I bagged steer manure. Ultimately, I worked in that company for almost 8 years. I moved my way up into sales. So ultimately, I ended up selling steer manure. And I can tell you, Ryan, nobody buys steer manure because they want to own a bag of shit, right? They buy steer manure for what they believe that will give them. Ultimately, you know, they'll be able to plant a beautiful garden, they'll be able to grow beautiful flowers, they'll have this feeling of accomplishment that they created something beautiful from this bag of shit. So as a sales guy, you know, again, it's not about selling the bag of manure, it's about selling the feeling that that bag of manure is ultimately going to give the customer. Imagine how that's going to feel when you can watch this little thing you took from seed, put it into the ground, bloom into this beautiful flower. Imagine that feeling. This bag of manure can help you get there, right? So that was kind of my first clue into that. And ultimately, I sort of hit the ceiling at the garden supply company and played hockey with a guy that was into finance, and he was having lots of fun, making lots of money. So I said, "How do you do that?" He told me. So I pursued that, ended up doing quite well in that front, and that was kind of my next lesson in the impact that emotion has on human behavior. I was 26 years old and I bought a Porsche, and you know, nobody buys a Porsche because it's a logical thing to do. We buy a Porsche because it's that emotional feeling of, you know, that pride of ownership, that sort of success, that look at me, look at me. You know, I was in the greater Vancouver area at the time in British Columbia in Canada. And at that time, it was the only yellow Porsche in the Lower Mainland. And when I went into the dealership, and that car salesman, that Porsche dealer, he knew this very, very well. So he got me to sit in the car. He got me to take it out for a test drive, put the top down. What does that feel like? Like, doesn't that make you feel like a baller driving this thing? Right? At 26 years old? Absolutely. So, you know, I bought that car based on emotion. There was nothing logical about it at all.
So I guess we talked before we were recording, and what drew me to you. I was looking around for cool people because I want to talk to awesome people, and I saw you like to speak about men and emotions, and how men always have to be this, you know, the stereotypical tough guy and they can't let their emotions out. And I'm like, wow, that's me. Like, you have to
Yeah.
keep all these emotions inside. You're running a business. You kind of express how you're feeling. You keep it all inside, and then all this stress and anxiety builds up, and there you are. How did you really start talking about that and realize that that's a major issue for everybody?
Yeah, well, like I said, so the sort of I studied the impact that emotion has on human behavior to become a better salesman, to become a better business leader. And it was probably, I don't know, 7 years ago. I was out for coffee with a lady friend of mine, and we were chatting about these things. And I'd said something at one point about, all this talk about us manning up. And I said, really, it should be more about men need to learn to woman up. And so I actually wrote a piece on that about 7 years ago, entitled "Men, It's Time to Woman Up." And flash forward, a couple of years later, um, my girlfriend, in 2015, ended up getting murdered by an ex-boyfriend of hers, which kind of really just tied this home. Here was a guy that made a decision with very permanent consequences based on a very temporary emotion. So everything I'd studied about how emotion impacts the decisions we make in everyday life kind of came full circle at that moment. And I realized, at that time, that I had an opportunity to turn this pain into purpose. And originally, when it happened, I had a lot of people that wanted me to go after the justice system, that Shirley failed her. She'd done all the right things, filed all the right paperwork, had the right restraining order. I mean, this guy was a bad apple. And, there's no amount of court orders that are going to protect you from somebody like that. So, I had a lot of people that wanted me to sort of go after the justice system, which, surely there's a lot of room for improvement there. But when I looked at that, I mean, we're talking about putting a Band-Aid on a ruptured jugular. And I started looking at, how do we prevent men like this from existing in the first place? Obviously there was something deep-seated within him that caused this behavior. So I started looking at, how do we prevent men like this from existing in the first place? And to me, it really does come back to that, what I call emotional reconnection practice. So, I mean, the fact of the matter is, emotionally connected men don't fucking kill people, period. And, we touched on it earlier. As guys, we're actively discouraged from exploring our emotions, for fear of, being called a pussy, or, we see it all the time. And I know there's a lot of talk these days, but finding real and meaningful ways to be able to practice this is still challenging. We still feel this, if you're a husband and a father, you probably feel this weight of, I got to be the provider. Whether or not your partner expects that or not, there's just this ingrained societal feeling of, I got to be the man. I got to step up. I got to provide. And I can't complain about it. I got to just suck it up. And this goes on and on and on, and it can easily spiral. I mean, look at the rates of loneliness, depression, and suicide in men, and it's ridiculous. It's an epidemic. So, for me, this encompasses so much more. Obviously, from a violence prevention standpoint, gender-based violence or intimate partner violence, I've become very involved in that prevention community. And to me, this is the answer. And not only is this the answer for that realm, but again, when we talk about suicide, depression, violence in general, men are acting out for a reason. The sexual assaults, the Me Too movements. And, again, I know this can be a polarizing topic, but the reality is, if we can find ways as guys to practice that emotional reconnection, it just makes us so much better as human beings, makes us better fathers, better partners, better employees, better leaders, all these things. Like, again, there's a plethora of evidence that talks about the importance of, emotional intelligence. Yet as guys, it's difficult for us to become emotionally intelligent when we're not allowed to explore that.
So what does somebody do like me in the business world? I'm supposed to be this leader. Everybody looks to me for the answers to everything. I go home, everybody looks to me for the answers to everything, and maybe I don't have the answers.
Right.
Uh, Maybe I would want some help from somebody else, or I need help for my own mind. What do I do?
Well, so I use the acronym SOAR as a framework: slow down, open up, accept, and reconnect with your emotional self. So I think that slow down is the first piece, and that's important. And I don't think we allow ourselves to do that enough, because we've got to be busy. We've got, you've got a young child, you've got an older child, you've probably got lots of things going on at home. It's busy, 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 busy. But just taking that 60 seconds to just pause, take a breath, and acknowledge what's going on. Because that awareness piece is huge. And I think sometimes we get so busy that we just don't acknowledge it. I appreciate the fact that you're able to acknowledge that. I do feel this weight. I've got this business to run. I've got to provide for my family. I've got to have all the answers. I mean, I think the reality, though, is today's leaders aren't necessarily the ones with all the answers. They're the ones that have the courage to stand up and say, you know what? I don't necessarily have all the answers, but I know where we can find them. I know where we're going. If you're willing to come with me, we can do this together. Mm. And from a leadership standpoint, I think that's important, because, again, I don't know that a lot of people want to be followers per se, right? They kind of want to be co-leaders. So, which is beautiful in a couple of different ways, because it takes some pressure off of you as the quote unquote leader. I mean, again, I don't want to diminish. Definitely we need people to step up and take a leadership role. But I think that role is changing. 15, 20 years ago, we wanted to follow people that had all the answers. Today, if I tell you something that you're going like, yeah, I'm not so sure about that, what are you going to do? You're going to whip out your smartphone, you're going to Google it, and you're saying, yeah, you know what? I knew Mike was full of shit. Versus...
I know on my end, I love, I can't tell you how much I love when somebody comes to me and says, hey, let's do this. Let's try this. This is what we want. This is what I'm going to do. Instead of, hey, Ryan, what should we do today? What should I do with this? How should we do this? How should I approach this? What do you think of this? It's overwhelming sometimes.
Absolutely. But you know what? That's a leadership skill, to create that culture, to create that environment where your people feel safe doing that. And again, that's where it comes down to being able to have the courage to be vulnerable and say, you know what, guys? Sure, I'm the boss. I'm the leader here. But understand, I don't always have all the answers. So I'm going to look for you to provide some of the answers as well. And maybe none of us have the answers, but if you got an idea, let's get after it and see what happens.
What do we do well, I have a 3-year-old, so it's a good scenario. What do I do, or what do other dads and moms do when we're raising that 3-year-old and we're kind of putting them in that box? Boys wear blue and girls wear pink, and guys are tough and don't cry, and girls are emotional. How do we retrain our minds to get around that?
Yeah, and again, I think it's just starting with that awareness piece and taking a breath. When our understanding that we are conditioned that way. We have been conditioned that way for a very, very long time. So just taking a pause before you quickly react to your son in an environment or a situation that maybe isn't quote unquote manly. Just taking that beat to say, you know what, maybe this is all right. Maybe he's just expressing how he feels. And in fact, maybe that's a really, really good thing. Maybe he'll be a stronger man because of it. You know, real strength isn't about suppressing, avoiding, or remaining stoic in the face of your emotions. Real strength is about having the courage to face them, sit with them, and learn from them what we can. So, like I say, when I say slow down, open up. So share. So allow your son to share. And sometimes for a 3-year-old, they share very expressively, right? I mean, think about that. And that's why I use the term reconnect with our emotional selves versus connect. Because, yeah, if you got a 3-year-old, chances are they're pretty connected with their emotions, right? They know how to let those emotions flow.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, over the years, we get stifled. And in my opinion, that causes all kinds of problems. When you don't, especially when you don't understand or aren't aware of the fact that you've been stifled. Um, Again, there's a fellow by the name of Dr. Antonio Damasio who talks about, he wrote a book called Descartes' Error. He talks about how we make decisions based on emotion. And if we don't understand the underlying emotions that drive the decisions we make, we have zero chance of living a purposeful existence, a fully awakened existence. And we tend to go through life on autopilot. We put our head down, we do our thing, and we just keep moving. Frankly, that's not how I want to exist. You know, I want to be able to take the time, feel the feelings. You know, even this last ultra marathon. I mean, it was incredibly disappointing. I spent thousands of dollars to go over to New Zealand. I trained for months to do this thing. I got hit with a flu bug the day before the race. There's nothing I can do about that. I'd be lying if I told you it wasn't disappointing. But just allowing myself to feel that disappointment without beating myself up. So that's the acceptance part, right? You feel stuff, and that's okay. And I think sometimes we get into this spiral of, you know what, I shouldn't feel disappointed. I ran almost 50 miles. Like, that's a long way. I should be very proud of that. And of course I am. But I'm also disappointed. I trained to run 100 miles. I wasn't able to do that. It's disappointing. And that's okay. So feel that disappointment. Lean into that. Let it come out, however that comes out. You know, for me, it's sharing with my partner, Michelle, and just being able to, you know, I said something to her that she sort of was taken aback, and I said, I'm enjoying the disappointment. And for me, the more, you know, and when Colleen was killed, this was never more true. I mean, there was an opportunity to feel deeply. A friend of mine sent me a letter by a fellow by the name of Ram Dass. He's an American spiritual leader. I think he just recently passed, actually. He wrote a letter to Rachel, which was a young girl who was brutally murdered, and he wrote a letter to her parents. And in that letter, there were sort of 3 key pieces for me. In that letter, he said, who among us is strong enough to remain conscious through such teachings as you are receiving? Probably very few. And when I read that, I just thought, you know what? It would be easy for me to bury my head in the sand, climb into a bottle, pop some pills, become, you know, even the running can become obsessive if you let it. But I made a very conscious decision that I was going to remain fully present and aware through that sadness, through that pain. The second thing he talked about is our rational minds will never understand, but our hearts, if we keep them open, will find their own intuitive way. And, you know, I can't tell you how many times I went through that why her? She was a beautiful human being, nothing but kindness, nothing but love. Why? and understanding that there is no rational answer to that question. And then the third piece for me was, now is the time to let your grief find expression, no false strength. And again, just allowing myself to feel that depth of sadness and pain, and not avoid it, not bury it, not suppress it. There were times where I'd curl up into a little ball on the floor and I'd just bawl my eyes out. But I'd allow that to happen. I'd revel in it. I'd allow the feelings to come. And so now I look for any experience, whether, again, it's pride of your kids doing something well, being able to feel that deeply and just take a moment to sit with that. Whether it's the disappointment of coming up short in a 100-miler, being able to actually feel that and sit with that. I mean, what a gift. And as a result, the richness of experience that I get to live life is incredible, Ryan. Like, it's just incredible. I was at a concert the other day with a friend of mine, two talented husband and wife team, just incredibly talented musicians. And they poured their heart out on stage, but just allowing myself to feel that concert, and some of their stuff is pretty heavy. He was sexually abused as a child, so he talks a little bit about that, and some of his songs are about that. It's very, very powerful. But again, just being able to experience that to that level of depth, is something that I couldn't have done 10 years ago.
And it's being present. So
Yes.
I have anxiety. I've suffered from anxiety for a long time. And one of the main things that can help you with anxiety is to be present. Smell the smells and feel the feelings. There's a really good poem. I pulled it out for here and I can't find it right now. I think it's called Ithaca. It's about, I'll put it on the podcast. It's the link to it. It's about, you're on this long journey, but enjoy the rocking of the boat, and maybe you're sick. Enjoy the feelings of being sick.
Yeah.
Enjoy everything, the rain, the sun, and it's hard when you're in those tough spots like you were just talking about to feel, but it's definitely important.
Yeah, and it's about practicing in times of calm to prepare for the storm. So looking for opportunities to practice. So you asked, what can you do? So think about, the next time you're driving in rush hour traffic and some jackass cuts you off. That's an opportunity. Rather than flipping them off and getting all pissy about it, you know what? Just take a breath. Slow down. Open up to whatever feeling's coming up. Allow that to be there. Accept that. Reconnect with your emotional self and carry on. That's an opportunity. And when you start shifting these minor annoyances from annoyances to opportunities, it's pretty incredible what happens. Again, even from a business standpoint, when things go sideways and you want to get angry, you want to get mad, you want to just recognizing that, okay, you know what? Here's an opportunity. Here's an opportunity for me to practice experiencing the feeling and deciding how I'm going to respond to this.
And I'll tell everybody out there, my worst decisions are reactionary. Always. My worst decisions are reactionary. So it could be that email that you send. It could be that phone call or that text message that you send when you're pissed off and you're angry and why, and you shoot off this email and then you're like, why did I do that?
Yes.
And you hurt feelings and hopefully nothing worse than that. It's just for making those reactive decisions.
Yeah. And, for guys, I think part of it is surrounding yourself. So I started an organization called Connected Men, which runs men's groups every week. And really, it's literally an opportunity for us to practice feeling. We've got a group of guys that get together with the intention of allowing ourselves to feel. And we've got a number of different themes every week. I use the analogy of physical fitness. If you want to be physically fit, you need to go work out a couple of times a week. Yet, what do we do for our emotional fitness? Absolutely nothing. So this is about creating a space for guys to get together, drop the mask, the stereotypical bullshit, and talk about, Jesus, you know what it feels like to be a business owner that's a sole provider, that's this, that's that, and just be able to feel that in a safe environment. And we get the opportunity to practice holding space. And for me, that's really the definition of holding space, is about creating an environment where we're fully present with another's experience, but also fully aware of how their experience impacts us. So if you're sharing with me being fully present to your experience, but also being fully present to how your experience is impacting me. And that practice of holding space. So it's not about fixing things. So if you start talking to me about how heavy this feels to be the boss, to be the leader, to always have to have the answers, it's not about me telling you, yeah, but you know what, Ryan, that's okay because yada, yada, yada. It's about me asking you questions to take you deeper into that experience. So what does that really feel like? Physically, where do you feel that? Do you feel it in your chest? Emotionally, what is that? Where do you go with that? What do you do with that? Let's unpack that a little bit. And again, just creating that space to explore. The holding space thing is so powerful. And as guys, typically, we're not very good at it. We tend to like to fix things, right? Mm-hmm. But this is another opportunity just to practice that holding space. I had a brilliant example of that a while back. Well, two examples. One of us not doing that. So one of the guys in our group was new to the group, and we'd kind of gone around the circle, and a bunch of guys had shared some things, and it came to him, and he said, I feel a little bit inadequate. You guys all have this life experience to share, and I feel like I have nothing to contribute. So I said, okay, well, what does that feel like, sitting here sharing that with us? And we got to the root of it. Was he felt ashamed that he had nothing to offer. And immediately, and myself included, we all started fixing it. Oh, no, dude, you got lots to offer. You're a great guy. I'm sure you've got tons of valuable experience that you can, and we started fixing it. That is not holding space. Perfect example of holding space. A couple of weeks later, I was out with my daughter, who was 16 at the time, and we were out for a coffee while she was getting her tires changed. And she asked me what was up, what was going on. So I started talking about some of the things we do in our men's group and why it's important, what the importance of allowing men to feel. And I said to her at one point, I said, do you understand why this is important? I said, because emotionally connected men don't kill people. And I absolutely fell apart, absolutely lost my mind. I started crying in the middle of this busy coffee shop. And of course, I immediately started trying to suck it up and pull myself together. And she just looked at me, little contented smile on her face. She leaned forward. I'm going to cry telling you about this. One of the most beautiful moments of my life. She leaned forward and she said, Dad, you've just spent the last 20 minutes explaining to me the importance of allowing men to feel. Let it out, she said. And she just sat there. And I thought, what a beautiful example of holding space from a 16-year-old girl. Like, it was just, again, it was one of the most beautiful experiences I've had with my daughter. It was incredible.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
Again, the opportunity to practice these things, just looking for those opportunities, I think is a big part of it. And like I said, that starts with the slow down piece.
How did you start a group like that?
Um, I just, so I created a framework, um, and
It
then,
sounds amazing.
yeah, and then I just put it out on Facebook and all my social media. I've got a bit of a following based on the work I've done, and yeah, we've got a couple of groups running now. I've got another group starting um, in northern Alberta. I've got a guy that reached out, so I've created basically a framework that will allow anybody. It's all peer led. Like it's not a therapy group. It's just a group of dudes getting together and dropping the mask of the stereotypical bullshit that we're expected to be, and really explore who we want to be. And I think there's a magic that happens when men get together with intention like that. And it's not about sort of, it's not your men's rights activist type thing. It's literally about allowing men space to practice feeling. And the depth of connection that gets made is incredible. Like I say, I've got a bunch of sort of exercises and things that we go through. One of our topics is forgiveness. I've got a worksheet that we list off all of the people who have wronged you and who you need to forgive, and then another list of all the people you've wronged and who you need forgiveness from. And then so we took some time and we sort of went through that, and then the group of us sat and we picked one of those individuals that we need to forgive, and we spoke as if they were sitting across from us. We told them what they had done to wrong us, and we forgave them. It was incredibly powerful, incredibly powerful. Yeah, it was amazing. We've done another one on connection. My girlfriend and I do a thing we call forehead time, and it's just we go forehead to forehead. It's not a sexual thing. It's not a talking thing. It's just a connection thing. And it's ultimately evolved to a point where if either of us feels somewhat disconnected from the other, we can just say, you know what? I need a little forehead time. And it's just about being connected, being fully present. So I shared that with the group, and we sit in my office boardroom, no table in the middle, on these caster chairs. And so I slid across the room to the guy in front of me, and we went forehead to forehead. And I said, "What does that feel like?" And he said, "Awkward." So we ended up pairing up the guys, and we did forehead time, guy to guy, forehead to forehead, and we just sat there for 2 minutes experiencing each other. And it's not something guys do. But again, allowing the opportunity to make that connection and examine what does that feel like? Why does that feel awkward? Why can I not be that connected with you as another dude? Like, that's what we're missing in this world. Again, the isolation. Again, guys, we're taught to lone wolf it, right? I got this. I don't need help. I'm not stopping for directions. I got this. And it's just so problematic. So my hope is, that we can continue to grow and expand this. And again, the connection made has been phenomenal. So over Christmas, we had one of the guys became aware of a woman in the community that needed some help. She had left a bad relationship, had a daughter, new place, nothing to her name. So we ended up reaching out to some community resources. We got her a couch, got her a couple of beds, and we all showed up with trucks on a Saturday, and we loaded this stuff up from the community center, took it out to her house, and took it up. So it's really cool. Like, the guys are starting to do some sort of philanthropic work together. Yeah, it's just it's been absolutely incredible to see what has come of this.
And no expectations. Everybody's just, it's not for business. It's not for gain or
No,
profit. It's just everybody just, they're there.
yeah,
Present.
like I say, it's really, yeah, it's about practicing presence and practicing holding space for other guys and allowing ourselves to feel,
Mm.
and just creating that environment where we can do that. And like I said, the friendships that have sort of come out of that have been incredible. You know, I know a couple of the guys, they get together every Saturday morning for breakfast now, just as an aside. Um, yeah, just yeah, it's been absolutely incredible to see what's happened.
Sounds amazing. I have to get more info on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know what kind of time we have, but I have more questions for you. In your TED Talk, I'm going to ask you anyway. In your TED Talk, one thing that really stood out to me, I believe it was your aunt. Um,
Yes.
so I'm going to let you tell the story, but it just really stood out to me that somebody could be so strong. And I wanted to get into kick-ass people because I hear you say that a lot. Could you tell us that story about your
Yeah,
aunt?
you bet. So the name of the TEDx was Redefining Badass. And one of the things, Colleen, um, my late girlfriend, used to always tease me about how badass I was as a business owner, a rock climber, an Ironman. Um, she would always tease me about how badass I was. And as a guy that I told you earlier, I was always more geek than jock. I kind of took that to heart, and it really made me feel pride when we teased me with that. In 2015, in August of 2015, we went to Penticton where I was going to be competing in a half Ironman. And that's where I got a real lesson in what it means to be a badass. So my Aunt Sharon lives in Penticton, and she's 65 years old-ish at the time. Not overly fit, not overly active, maybe even a little bit overweight. So we had finished the race and ended up at her place for dinner the next night. And she started telling us this story about how, she wanted to get a little bit more fit, a little bit more active this year. So when she saw that I was coming to town, she looked up the race and they had a 5K fun run the day before the big race. So she decided to sign up. She says, I knew full well I was going to be dead last, but I wanted to do this anyways. So she tells us a story. Yeah, I signed up. I went to the start line. I got way at the back of the pack because I'm going to be dead last, but I didn't care. So the gun goes, she takes off, and she's telling us this story. She says, there's about a kilometer left to go, and all of a sudden this kid on a bike starts riding beside me. And she says, I looked over at him. I said, you're here because I'm last, aren't you? And he says, yep, I'm afraid so. He says, but you're doing great. You're doing great. And he starts cheering her in. And so he rides with her that whole last kilometer to the finish line. And they get within 100 meters or so of the finish line. And he says, okay, I'm going to ride ahead and let him know you're coming in. She's like, oh, no, 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 no. And she looks up and she can see they've already started tearing down the finish line. They've already started packing up the PA system. So he rides ahead, lets them know that she's still out on course. Well, they set everything back up again. Not only did they set everything back up, they sent a fellow by the name of Jeff Simons out to run in with her. And Jeff Simons, a professional triathlete. He won, I think, the 2017 Melbourne Ironman. Like, he's a badass triathlete. So Sharon finishes telling us this story. She gets up from dinner, goes into the kitchen, and Colleen just looks at me and she says, you know what, Mike? She goes, now that's fucking badass. And I just thought, yes, having the courage to compete in a race that you know full well you're going to finish dead last, that takes courage. That takes guts. That's badass. It's not about winning that 5K race. It's about having the courage to compete. And I told this story to, I went and spoke to a group of college athletics. It was 100 men, 100 male athletes from their leadership program. And I told that story. And I remember when I first got in the room, the guys were kind of, they had all been voluntold to be there. So they didn't really want to be there. And they were all sort of burping and farting and scratching and, not paying a lot of attention. But as the story unfolded, I could tell that, I'm starting to get their attention. And I remember asking them at the end of that, like, so how many of you guys would have the balls to compete in an event that you knew full well you were going to finish dead last? And I knew, and these are all fairly high level athletics. I thought, yeah, probably none of you. If you knew you were going to finish dead last, I doubt you would actually compete. So yeah, that to me just is the epitome of what it means to be a badass. And again, why I believe we need to redefine what it means to be a badass. Having that courage to be vulnerable. It was the drive home. We talked about that story the entire drive home, and we were listening to Tim Ferriss, and he had Brene Brown on. And Brene, he asked Brene something to the effect of, what do you think of the over feminization of boys in our school system? And again, she handled it brilliantly. She talked about, I don't believe that masculine and feminine are mutually exclusive. She said, in fact, I believe that the right combination of tough and tender is the perfect equation for badassery. And for me, that kind of brought it all home. And then, of course, it was just a month and a bit later that Colleen was murdered. So again, that sort of story and this guy's actions, who he probably figured himself somewhat of a badass. We need to redefine what it means to be a badass in a big way.
Yeah.
In a big way.
So what do you have in store for this year, for 2020?
2020. Well, I'm super excited about 2020. So we talked about, I ultimately went on in that finance business. I ended up setting up my own shop back in 2003. I ran that up until last year. I actually sold the business so that this could become my primary focus. So I do a lot of professional speaking. I have for years. So 2020 is the year of me actually doing what I want to do. I did very well from a business perspective, and the problem with doing well in a business you don't love is you get those sort of golden handcuffs. So yeah, I took a bit of a leap last year. I sold. So right now I'm unemployed. Not entirely true, but I do consulting work. I speak professionally. I get hired to do that. But yeah, that is the focus, and that's what 2020 is going to look like. And then I've got another 100-miler, the Sinister 7 100-miler coming up in July. So I've attempted that one twice. The first year I finished it, but I was almost 2 hours over time limit. The second year I made it 120 kilometers and pulled the plug. So this is my year. This is my third crack at it. So I got to come in under 30 hours.
Wow, awesome. I have to ask, how do you train for something like that? Do you just if you're sprinting, you're running sprints. I know you can run sprints, but you're not just going to go out and run 100 miles training.
No. So I've hired a coach. So again, I'm a big fan of commitment, coaching, and discipline are kind of the three things you need. Obviously, you need to be committed to the process. And that process is having the discipline to get the training blocks in. The next piece is, what do those training blocks need to look like? So I hired a coach. So they've got me set up. Again, every week is a little bit different. So you've got your build week, you've got your peak week, and then you've got your recovery week, and you sort of cycle through. I mean, I'm not going to do it justice because I don't have the education behind me to know that, but that's why I hire somebody. So so we do interval work, we do some speed work, we do some sprints, and then weekends we typically do back-to-back long runs. So Saturday I might have a 3 or 4 hour run. Sunday I might have another 3 or 4 hour run. And we just put them back to back so that it's, as physiologically it's as taxing or you get the same benefit of doing an 8 hour run, but it's broken up over 2 days. So it's a little less destructive on the body.
Wow.
And it's just about repetition and consistency. And then, at the point you get to the start line, it's less about physical fitness and more about that mental piece. Because, like I said, at some point it sucks, and you just have to get to like, okay, wait an hour. And that's my mantra, right? When it gets to a low point, okay, wait an hour, see how you feel. Wait an hour, see how you feel. And ultimately, you have these ebbs and flows, peaks and valleys, and usually it does come back.
It's amazing.
It is. It's really incredible to see. And it's, again, as you said, the same holds true in life. We hit low points. Just hang on. Wait an hour, wait a month, wait a year, whatever it has to be. Just keep moving forward.
Awesome.
Keep moving forward.
Well, Mike, where can everybody find you? We'll put your links up, but where can people reach out to you?
Yeah, mikecameron.ca is the best bet. YouTube channel is mikecameron.ca/YouTube. That'll redirect you there. And yeah, all my social media links are there. And yeah, I'm pretty active on Instagram. I do a daily story at Axiom Mike.
Awesome. I mean, I really appreciate it. I mean, people are going to get a lot of benefit out of this, I'm sure.
Well, I hope so.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
My pleasure, man.
Thank you, sir. I'll talk to you soon.
You bet.